Have you ever walked into a room full of people and somehow felt like nobody actually noticed you were there? Not in the dramatic movie scene way, more like you were physically present, but emotionally transparent. You spoke, but people talked over you. You had feelings, but they never seemed important enough for anyone to ask about. And maybe, without realizing it, that feeling followed you into adulthood. A lot of people assume that if someone grew up feeling invisible, they'll become shy, quiet, maybe socially awkward. But psychology tells a much stranger story. Sometimes the people who felt the most unseen as children grow up to be the funniest person in the room, the overachiever, the people pleaser, the one who always says, "I'm fine," before anyone even asks. In other words, invisibility doesn't always make someone disappear. Sometimes it makes them spend their whole life trying to prove they exist. Think about a child in a busy household, not necessarily an abusive one, just a house where louder voices took up more space. Maybe there was a sibling who needed more attention. Maybe the parents were stressed, overworked, emotionally distant, or simply not very tuned in. The child learns something subtle but powerful. My needs don't interrupt the world. My sadness can wait. My excitement isn't that important. It's not usually taught with words, it's taught through repetition, like background music your brain stops consciously hearing but never forgets. And that's the thing about childhood. Your brain is basically a tiny scientist collecting evidence about what kind of person you're allowed to be. Every ignored comment, every interrupted story, every moment where no one notices you're upset, it all becomes data. Your nervous system starts building a theory. Maybe being noticed isn't safe, or maybe it's just not possible. Psychologists often talk about attachment styles, and one pattern that can come from emotional neglect is what's called dismissive or avoidant attachment. But here's where it gets interesting. It's not always that these people want distance. Often they deeply crave closeness. They just learned early that reaching for it might lead to disappointment, so they train themselves not to need it. Imagine being hungry but convincing yourself food is overrated. That's what emotional invisibility can do. It teaches you to starve politely. As adults, this can show up in ways that don't seem connected at all. Maybe you never ask for help, even when you're drowning. Maybe you tell yourself, "I don't want to bother anyone," like it's a moral virtue. Maybe when someone finally gives you genuine attention, your first instinct is suspicion. Why are they being so nice? What do they want? That reaction isn't random. Your brain remembers a world where being overlooked was normal, so attention can feel almost suspiciously bright, like someone turning on a flashlight in a room you've been living in for years. There's also a strange paradox. People who felt invisible growing up often become hyper-aware of other people's emotions. They can read the mood in a room faster than most. They notice tiny shifts in tone, facial expressions, pauses in conversation. It's like becoming an emotional weather forecaster. Why? Because as kids, paying close attention to others may have been the only way to feel connected at all. If no one was looking at them, they learned to look at everyone else. This is why some of the most empathetic people you'll ever meet carry a quiet sadness they rarely talk about. They can make everyone else feel seen because they know exactly what it feels like not to be. It's the classic irony. The person checking if everyone's okay is often the one nobody thinks to check on. There's actually research suggesting that social exclusion activates some of the same brain regions involved in physical pain, particularly the anterior cingulate cortex. In simple terms, being ignored can literally hurt. Your brain doesn't treat emotional invisibility like a minor inconvenience. It treats it like a threat. For a kid, that makes sense. Humans are wired for connection. Thousands of years ago, being excluded from the group wasn't just lonely, it was dangerous. So when a kid consistently feels unseen, the brain doesn't shrug it off. It adapts. It says, "Fine, I'll survive by becoming low maintenance, by asking for less, by shrinking." And sometimes that shrinking becomes an identity. You become the person who doesn't need much, the easy friend, the quiet partner, the student who never causes problems. People praise it. They call you mature, independent, chill. But inside, there can be this old, unspoken question. If I stop being easy, will anyone still keep me around? That's a heavy question to carry, especially because many people don't even realize that's what's driving them. They just think they're introverted or private or the not the emotional type. But often, beneath that calm exterior is a child who learned that speaking up didn't change much, so silence became safer. The good news is this: the patterns you learn to survive are not the same as who you are. They're adaptations, not destiny. The child who felt invisible wasn't broken. They were incredibly observant, incredibly adaptive. They learned how to survive in an emotional climate that asked them to take up less space. But survival strategies can outlive the situation that created them. And maybe that's the most important shift. If you grew up feeling invisible, your sensitivity isn't weakness. Your overthinking isn't random. Your need to withdraw, to joke your way through pain, to avoid asking for too much, it all makes sense. It came from somewhere. Once you see the pattern, it stops being a personality mystery and starts becoming a story you can rewrite. So, if any of this felt uncomfortably familiar, maybe take a second and ask yourself, where in your life are you still acting like nobody can really see you, even when they're trying to? That answer can change a lot. And if you've ever felt this way, you're definitely not the only one. Share your thoughts below. Sometimes the people who felt invisible the longest have the most powerful things to say once they finally speak. And if you enjoy exploring the hidden psychology behind human behavior, subscribe to the channel, because understanding yourself starts with hearing the things nobody ever explained before.